Hi and welcome back. In this video, we'll be turning our project, which used an in-memory database, into one using files for storage. What we've got here is our database, which is a list. So the first thing to do is to start transitioning our database.py file from using this list to store things into using a file. This is the reason why I've structured the code the way that I've structured it for you. Now, if we want to add a book, we already know how to add a new line to a database, or if we don't, we're going to learn in this video. We already know how to read a file and get all its contents. We already know how to save into a file. We already know how to read a file and delete something and then save it again. So this database.py here is what's called an interface in programming. An interface between our business logic, what a program is supposed to do, and the storage, which in this case will be a database, a file. And we're going to move on to database soon. So if we wanted to add a book, that would be very straightforward. All we have to do is, well, first of all, before we actually start writing any code, is change this to a CSV file and decide on the format of the CSV file, which I think should be name, author, read, like so. Now that that's clear, we have decided that we're going to store name, then author, then read, separated by commas. We can continue. Notice that it could be beneficial to separate it by hashes instead, because the titles may have commas in them, but for now we're not going to worry about that. You can make that change later on if you want. So to add a book, all we have to do is say with open books.txt in read mode as file, and here, write mode as file, and here what we're going to do is add a new book at the end. I'm just going to delete this thing here. However, I mentioned earlier on when we started looking at files that write mode would erase all contents of the file, and then you would be able to start writing from the very top of the file. We don't want to do this because our add book should add a new book probably at the end of the file. We do want to keep the other books that are already in the file, otherwise we'll only ever be able to have one book at a time. Instead of W mode, we can use A mode, which stands for append. So anything we write will automatically go to the very end of the file. Because our file is going to have this structure, and then it's going to have a \n at the end, anything we write is always going to be at the very bottom of the file. Here's why. We're going to add a book, and that's going to be in this format: name, author, read, new line. Then we'll add another one, and because there's a new line, it will go on the next line. Then when we add another one, it'll go on the next line, and so forth. So it's important that we include that new line there, because append mode will just go to the very end of the file, the very last character, which will be the new line. So all we have to do is file.write, name, author, and then we have to decide on how we're going to store false values. Because the text file that we're going to be using is not a Python file, maybe false doesn't make much sense. Although it could, it's up to you. But I'm going to store it as 0. 0 for false, 1 for true. It's up to you what you do. And this is how we would add a new book to books.txt. Notice though, we still got our books variable up here. We don't need that, so I'm going to rename it into books file, and this is going to be books.txt, and this is going to be books file. That way, we're storing the file name up here. That's essentially our database. To get all books is going to be slightly more challenging. Once again, I'm going to go here and have a couple of lines of name, author, read, just so it's a bit clearer what we're doing. And the first thing we want to do is, of course, open the file. You know how to do this. With open books file in read mode as file. And now we want to get all the lines. But we want to get the lines without the white space. I hope you remember how to do this exactly using the strip method. We're going to say lines is line.strip for line in file.readlines. That's going to read all the lines, including the \ns, and it's going to give us each one in a list, in an element of the list, and for each of the elements, we're going to strip the white space, which is going to remove this here. So now we're going to have this as our contents of this list here. Now, we can also chain to it a split so that we will get one list of lists. Indeed, now our list will have this format. Like so. So we'll have one list, and inside it we'll have sublists, where each one is going to be a list of name, author, read. Now what we're going to do is we're going to construct our book dictionaries. So this is going to be another list comprehension. In the list, and notice by the way, you can put list comprehensions in multiple lines. It's totally cool, totally fine. Line 0. Author is going to be line 1, and read is going to be line 2. Of course, line doesn't exist, so we're going to do for line in lines. And there we have it. Remember that each line, or rather the whole lines list has this format: name, author, read. Name, author, read. So for line in lines is giving us one of these lists. And then we're saying that name is the 0th element of this sublist, which is the name. Author is the first element of this sublist, which is the author. And read is the 3rd element of this sublist, which is the read status there. Then we can return books. Or indeed, if you want to save some space, because this variable here is pretty redundant, we can just say return this list comprehension. That's going to execute the list comprehension first and then return it. Okay, we've got the get all books and the add book. Now we can move on to marking a book as read. This is not so easy because although it's possible to go into the file and modify it, it's actually much easier to read the file in, modify the book that we want, and then save them all to the file again. That's actually much easier. So we're going to go for that in this video. The first thing to do is, of course, to say books is get all books. Okay. For some reason, it keeps saying, oh yeah, this thing here. It kept saying this shadows on the outer variable, but I was pretty sure we deleted it. So I was wondering what the hell that was. But of course, the global books there was creating it again. So we don't want to do that. Anyway, marking book as read. The first thing we want to do is get all the books. Then we want to iterate over them. Well, in fact, we already have it here. For book in books, if the book's name is equal to the name that we passed in, we're going to set it to read, except now instead of true, it's going to be 1, because 1 means true and 0 means false in our file. And then at the end, we have to save all of the books that we've retrieved back into the database, and one of them will have changed from 0 to 1. So for that, I'm going to create another function that I'm going to call underscore save all books, and I'm going to pass it the books that we read, the books variable. This function doesn't exist, so we shall create it. The reason why I'm calling it underscore save all books is because in Python, this tells other developers that they should not call this function. You should only call this function from within this file. This is normally known as a private function in most programming languages. Python doesn't have the concept of a private function, so other people from outside the file can still call this function if they want, but the naming convention in Python says that if a function has an underscore in front, you should probably not call it. So that's what we're doing here, just calling it with an underscore first, or naming it with an underscore first, so that other people know that this is a function that they probably shouldn't use. They should only use delete book, mark book as read, get all books, and add book. So in order to save all the books, well, we just have to open the file in write mode this time, and we're going to delete the entire file and rewrite it. And we're going to go through each book and say file write, book name, book author, and book read. And at the end, make sure to put the \n. That's pretty important as well. And actually, I think we forgot to put it up here. So make sure to file write a \n in there as well. That's important. I did say earlier it was really important, then I forgot. There you have it. So now what we're doing in this function is opening the file, deleting all its contents with the write mode, and then just going through all of the books in the list that we got as a parameter, and for each book, writing out its details in CSV format and a new null at the end. So it's just going to rewrite our entire file. Not the most efficient thing to be doing, I'll be honest with you, but it's much easier than going and modifying the file. Okay. So now this _SaveAllBooks function does exist, so we're safe to use it there. And again, what we've done in this function is read all the books, gone through them and modified the one we want, and then saved them all back. And that is essentially the same thing we're going to do for deleting a book. So I'd encourage you to, now that I've implemented these two functions, go and implement the delete book function on your own. Once again, read all the books, recreate the list without the book that you want to delete, and then save them all back. Let's try that. I hope you managed. What I would do is once again say books is get all books. Now I'm going to say that books is actually book for book in books if the book's name is not equal to the name we got as a parameter. And finally, save all books. Notice how the function call here, this function is above this function. And I did say previously that you'd want functions to be defined in the order in which they're used. This is fine because this function was actually used above. So I think this is okay. Again, we're using the list comprehension to iterate over our books and then only put the book into a new list if the book's name matches. Doesn't match. So we're putting in all the books except the one that is here. And that's it. We now have our delete book, mark book as read, get all books, and add book functions. They are still the same functions as before. The names are the same. All they're doing now is they are storing things into a file instead of into a list. So if we go over to app.py, we actually don't have to change anything because database.addBook doesn't know whether this is going into a list or a file, and it doesn't care. All it knows is that the book is being added. Here in list books, database.getAllBooks will get the books, and you don't care where it's getting them from. So we have very well decoupled our business logic, our app, from our database. We've not done a perfect job, because the book read status is now going to be, yes, if the book is exactly equal to 1, otherwise no. So now instead of being true or false, it's 1 or 0. So that's the only thing there. Okay, other than that, prompt read book is going to get the name and then mark it as read. And you know that in the background, the database is going to the file, opening it, looking through all the books, marking one as read, saving them back. But your app doesn't care. So what we've created here is a nice interface between our app and our data storage mechanism that very nicely hides all the complexity inside this file. And this is, as I said earlier, normally called an interface. And the interface here is to our database. And the contents of the interface are these 4 functions: the add book, get all books, mark book as read, and delete book. And normally we've been talking about user interfaces because users have been interacting with the menu that we've given them. But this database is an API, is an application programming interface. We've created an interface so that this part of the program, app.py, can interact with another part of the program, the database, via the interface that we've defined: prompt add book, list books, prompt read book, and prompt delete book. So if you think of app.py as a user, these are the options. that it can use to interact with the database. And it doesn't care what the implementation is, whether it's a list or whether it's a file. And indeed, as we move forward into databases, as a SQL database, as a relational database, it won't care either about that. Let's run this app and try it out. And by the way, I'm just going to stop that, and this is annoying me a little bit. We are going to add a space there. Okay, let's run it. We're going to add a new book. We're going to enter clean code by Robert. And as you can see, no errors. We're going to list all the books. And we see clean code by Robert. We can mark a book as red, and that'll be clean code. Then we can list them again. And now it appears as red. We can delete a book. And we can list them again, and nothing appears there. And notice how books.txt has not appeared in PyCharm yet. The file does exist. If you go on your Finder or on your Windows Explorer program into the directory in which this project is, you'll see the file is there, but PyCharm doesn't quite update that quickly, so it's not showing it there. Okay, let's exit that program. Notice how now the file does appear, and let's delete the file. Now let's run the app again. And now I'm going to read books. What do you think is going to happen when I press enter? Well, let's see. Oops, probably not what we wanted. We probably wanted either nothing to print out, or even nicer would be some sort of message saying you don't have any books. But instead we got a file not found error. No such file or directory, books.txt. And the reason for that, I'm just going to hide this away. The reason for that is because when we add a new book, or indeed when we save all books, we are using a constructive method of file opening. So we are creating the file here, or we are creating the file here if it doesn't exist. But the read method is not constructive. It is more passive, and it doesn't create the file if it doesn't exist. Indeed, it gives you an error and it says file not found. So what we want to do is make sure the file exists before we go and read it. And for that, I'm going to create one last function here in our database interface. And that's going to be here, create book table. And I'm consciously calling it table, even though it's a file, because this is called database, not called files. And as we migrate over into a database, this is going to be responsible for creating the table that is going to store the books. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, we are going to get there very soon. So all to do here is open it in write mode. And you don't have to do anything with it. It's going to close automatically when you exit this context manager. So you don't have to worry about anything. And indeed, as file is optional, so you don't need it either, because you're not going to use the variable for anything. And again, this just to make sure that the file is there. Okay, now we can rerun the app, list our books. Oh, of course, my bad. We created the method here, the function in the interface, but we didn't actually call it. So at the top of the menu, before we ask the user for their input, just type database.createBookTable, and that'll be all you need to do. Now we can list books, and we don't get anything back. Feel free, of course, to continue developing this program, and I just stopped it, and when you stop it, you get a nice error there as well. Feel free to add some more stuff to your program. What if there are no books? Print something else out. Add some more data to the books store. You do whatever you want to do. This is your program now, so congratulations on finishing this segment. As we move on, we're going to look at how to store this data as JSON. And if you're interested in that, just look at the next video. If you're not really keen on storing things in databases in files any longer, feel free to skip the next video, move on to the very following one, where we're going to start looking at databases. So I'll see you either in the next video or in the one after that. See you soon.